If you are a Black woman in corporate America, academia, entertainment, heck, working at McDonald's, 10 out of 10, you've had a Ketanji Brown Jackson experience. I like that you said that sometimes you have to transplant yourself. Sometimes you have to allow yourself to be transplanted to a new location so that you grow. I wondered how much, or if there was any resistance on your part in that, in moving, or if you saw the value of it um, almost immediately.
Well, when I saw the crap that happened,
Okay.
um, and I'm not gonna go into there was a whole bunch of crap.
Okay.
Um, and people knew that I was done wrong. So when they said, it's like, we won't say this publicly, but we'll come to you privately and say you need to move, because if you stay there, you're never going to advance, because he's not going to let you do anything. They knew his agenda. His agenda was to tear me down. And so when they told me privately, you need to go, I knew I needed to go. And the people at the church knew that I wasn't leaving them. It was important that they knew my leaving had nothing to do with them. So they knew I wasn't leaving them. I was leaving the person that was in charge so that I could go someplace else. So I was okay with it because I was frustrated being there. And so if you can't go to church and be uplifted, you got to go someplace else where you can.
Mm-hmm.
If you're being fed sour milk, you want to go someplace where you can get some fresh milk. So when I was there, because of all the others, if I know that you're full of crap, because I'll just speak plainly, if you full of crap, you can't preach to me. You can't, because you can preach a sound sermon, but the life you live and the garbage that comes out when you step out of that pulpit is so contradictory to what you're saying. I can't receive what you're saying and believe it.
Well,
and so leaving there allowed me to get some fresh milk.
You talked about two words that are resonating with me a lot. You talked about betrayal, but at the very beginning, you talked about resiliency. And I think you're talking about a lot of ways in which you found resiliency while going through betrayal. But I'm hoping you'll talk some more about ways in which you found resiliency as you went through that process of being strengthened, even though you were going through this betrayal.
That's a hard one for me to answer. A lot of it comes from the way I was raised. My parents always taught us to stand up for what we knew to be right. And even though it might have put us in some bad situations or made it difficult for us, know that if you stand up for what's right, the spotlight's on you.
Mm-hmm.
So you have to be willing to accept all the stuff that can come with that. And so when I started experiencing that in my, when I was working, I'd call and talk to my parents and be like, what do I need to do? How do I deal with this? And I would listen to their words of wisdom about, we'll speak up for what's right, document everything.
Mm-hmm.
Make sure you document. So I documented everything. So if somebody came back and said something, I had my documentation there. When I went to disciplinary hearings and they said what happened, the person was trying to talk off the cuff, I had my documentation. Guess who they believed when they had to come down to it? the one who had documentation.
Mhm.
Because I said, on such and such a date at such and such a time, I talked to so-and-so, or I met with so-and-so, and they said this, 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 and this, and my response was this. It was almost a verbatim. And so when I'm here in a hearing and they're asking what happened, and my supervisors, well, you know, I told them about such and such, and I said such and such, well, do you have any documentation? Well, no, but I remember the conversation. Vanessa, what happened? On June 6th, such and such and such and such. On June 10th, such and such and such and such. And, you know, they were like, well, she's got documentation of everything. So, I mean, I learned to document everything. I had to make sure I covered myself.
You mentioned racial discrimination, and so you were really practicing documentation because of, well, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but it seemed to me that you mentioned that this was coming out of a racial discrimination issue, and that was the impetus for your documentation. Is that accurate?
Some of it was racial discrimination. Some of it was just, when I was down south, I was the outsider, plain and simple. I had never been called a Yankee until I worked in the South. And they used to say, are you a Yankee? Or are you a damn Yankee? I said, what's the difference? They said, a Yankee comes to visit, a damn Yankee stays. I said, well, then I guess I'm just a damn Yankee.
One of the things that we would typically ask is, where are you in your healing process?
Oh, I'm past being, I mean, that stuff, I don't know if I call it hurt. I think it's they were those things, though, maybe they were hurts, but they're things you remember. There are certain things that people say that you just never forget. You can move on from them, but you never forget, because there were lessons learned. They were like my training wheels. When you had your training wheels on your bike and you first took them off and you fell, you remember that first time you fell off the bike and you had to get back up and learn that you could make it on your own. So I remember those things because they were triggers. They were things that, you know, I'd never been called that. So for me, a person who grew up in the Midwest, moving to the South and then being called a Yankee, I had never been classified as a Yankee before.
Yes.
How you going, you know, and when I went, after I left there and I went back to visit, I remember them saying, you know, hey, the Yankees back, the Yankees back. I had never been called a Yankee before. Still don't really know what the significance of calling me a Yankee was.
Did you feel like it was a way for them to mark you as an outsider?
Oh, definitely. Because one of the things that I found that frustrated me when I was down south was, in a lot of ways, there were things that happened that were discriminatory, but a lot of times the people had just accepted that that's just the way it is. And I was like, no, you don't need to accept this. This is not okay. They can't do this to you just because of the color of your skin. You got to stand up to this. And mind you, I'm like 21, 22 years old saying this to people that are older than me. You got to stand up for this. This is not right. So I was always vocal about it. And I was always willing to step up and be in the fight, you know, because it was, to me, it was the right thing to do. And I was always taught to do that because I had seen my parents suffer discrimination. I had seen that growing up. I remember us getting followed by the police every time we drove through this town on our way to church and on our way home. The police followed us from the time we entered the city limits till we left the city limits. And periodically they'd pull us over. I remember us being pulled over and the police calling my father boy. So growing up, seeing that virtually my entire life. By the time I'm 17, 18, 19, I've already seen active discrimination and racism. It was what I saw on a regular basis. And so when I went to the South to school and then I got a job there and I'm working there and I'm seeing this, I can't just sit back and go, that's okay. That's how it's always been. We just need to sit by and let it be. Heck to the no.
Hmm. Did you find when you went to the South that some of the discrimination you were dealing with was because you were a damn Yankee? And to
Well,
add
I
insult
think
to injury, you were a black damn Yankee?
you know, I know that was part of it. It was that I was this Yankee, and then I was, as the personnel director said, I was really good at what I did. And so that created some intimidation for some people because I picked up the job real quickly. So I was learning to do things while I was on probation. Most people weren't trained to do till they had been off of probation.
Mhm.
And so initially they looked at me as somebody to lead, but then some of the people who had been in the job for a while, I think they didn't like the fact that I was new and I was excelling.
A common thread, and tell me if you see this as a common thread, or if I'm just picking up something incorrectly. A common thread between that work hurt and that church hurt was that there was a group of people that were intimidated by your success, whether that be success in the community or that be success in being able to excel at your job, but that the challenges for you are coming from people who are saying she's too big for her britches, um, you know, as the old folks used to say, and how dare her be better than I am, even though they wouldn't recognize it as that. But there's some, it seems like there's some insecurity in those people's ability to do their own, in their own successes.
Yeah.
Does that
Yeah.
make sense?
And yeah, it makes sense. And I think that probably is a common thread, because when I work with people who are confident in who they are and know their stuff, I don't have these issues.
Mm.
But when I'm working with people who are intimidated by my presence, then they have to find a way to diminish me so that they can feel larger than me. I'm fine not being the visible person. But if somebody needs to stand up and speak up for something, especially if it has to do with an injustice, if nobody's willing to do it, I will do it, because I just cannot tolerate isms. Isms set me off. Racism, classism, sexism, it sets me, I'm going to react. And so, you know, I've had to be aware of that. But yeah, I think, Vanya, to that point that you asked, I was talking to somebody about one experience I had with this when I was first in the ministry part, and I was talking about the first person that I was dealing with. There was a meeting at church. We had a church meeting, and I had to be there as a student in ministry. So I sat on the back row, in the very back of the church. All the people were in the first 3 to 5 rows. So I'm 8 rows back from them at least. Never opened my mouth. Never said a word. I'm behind the people. The only person who can see me is the pastor. After that meeting, the pastor had me come in his office and he lectured me for 2 hours about how disruptive I was to the meeting. and how I was disrespectful and disruptive. And I never opened my mouth and I never said a word. And I was in the back of the room.
That's your president.
And that's when I realized that my nonverbal is louder than my verbal. And so I had to learn to manage my nonverbal and learn how to hold myself back and try and keep a poker face when people are irking me in meetings, so that hopefully they can't see my real reaction. And I try and internalize it, because my nonverbal is that loud, that he said I was disruptive and disrespectful during that meeting, and I never said a word and never opened my mouth.
It goes back to what you said before, I think, as far as who you are, what your presence is, what your calling is in community, to be the one who speaks up when there's an issue of injustice. And I guess I'm wondering, as you talked about the training wheels and the lessons learned, what are some of those lessons learned in terms of effectiveness in your speaking out, in terms of the resilience that you've gained through the emotional? And you had said that in the workplace, it wasn't hurt, but anger. In the church portion, there was hurt because of your heart. But I'm just hoping that you'll speak to some of those lessons learned from training wheels to now being in your church leadership roles.
What I've always told people is that you have to be willing to speak up for what you know is right. But you have to also realize that when you speak up, there's a target that's going to be on you.
Yes.
And if you can't handle the target, then maybe you need to have somebody else advocate on your behalf. Because that target means they're out to get you at all costs. I mean, I at one point when I was on city council here, and I was working at Miami University. And there was some things that happened in the police department back then that were wrong. And a parent asked me to sit in on a meeting when she met with the head of the police department. So I went to the meeting with her, and I was floored by the disrespect she was given. And I said as much to the person who was at that time the chief of police. And then some people came to a council meeting and it complained about some harassment and the way they were treated and spoken to. And so they made a comment, well, you know, this is a good time for us to schedule a work session. And I said, we can schedule a work session, but we owe these people an answer today. We need to respond to what they've said and not just say, well, let's just have a work session. And I said, because what these people have said are things that we need to address. They need to understand we're listening and we hear them, and we want to make sure they're addressed. My saying that resulted in them, people at that time, trying to get me fired from my job. They tried to get me removed from city council. They harassed my parents because I spoke up, which was my job as a council person. But they literally accused me of things. They tried to say there was a conflict of interest. I mean, they went after me with both barrels. And I had to tell the chief, they better stop harassing my parents or it's going to get real ugly, real fast. And so they stopped. But I had to be strong enough to know I'm not the one in the wrong. The legal department said she's not wrong. What she's doing, she has a right to do. She can be in this position. There's no conflict of interest. The law is in her favor. but they had to spend legal time doing legal research to prove that I was not illegally serving and all this other stuff. So, I think you have to know that if you're going to stand up, unfortunately, it shouldn't be that way, that the person who's been the victim has to then be the target, because you've already been victimized and now they're making you their target. So I had to be strong enough to stand up anyway. And I think I just gained strength through the fact that every time they couldn't tear me down, it made me stronger.
Vanessa, and I'm going to read this to everyone. It was something that was posted on Facebook, and the author was Ashley Aldrich, who I think is the wife of a friend of mine. If you are a Black woman in corporate America, academia, entertainment, heck, working at McDonald's, 10 out of 10, you've had a Ketanji Brown Jackson experience at least once in your life. I'm exhausted for her and for us. We watched our lives play out on TV all week, and the survey says we are not crazy. These folks tried to talk to us, and play us like we are stupid. We just have to grin and bear it. Meanwhile, we're holding more degrees, more credentials than the ones during the questioning. We're questioning our ideas, values, experiences, and worth. It's tiring. Something that you said made me think about that, because it's had to be tiring for you just to have to, I was thinking about you talking about the pastor saying, how dare you be disrespectful? And you have said nothing. That it's just sometimes tiring to have to figure out how to have a poker face that doesn't say you're full of crap and this is BS, and to keep going with it. So, yeah.
But I would not change what I did, but it's that thing that I think we need to instill in our kids, especially our children of color, how to stand up for yourself, but still be respectful in the process.
Yes.
Because, if I cuss out the folk, not that I ain't capable, because I am, I could, but if I just cuss folks out and smart it off at them, they just disregard me. But when I can tear you down and speak to you respectfully and diminish you with facts and evidence and kindness, then you can't say I've done something wrong. You can disagree with me all day long, but you can't say I disrespected you. You can't say I cussed at you. You can't say that I told lies on you, because I'm going to give you the truth. I'm going to give you the facts. I'm going to challenge you. I'm going to make you think. I'm going to make you work. And if you want to come after me, come on. I've just, I think, like you said, Vanya, I've been dealing with this all of my life. So I've got a tougher, I have a tougher facade than a lot of people because of what I've been through and what I've seen. And so for people who don't have that tough skin, I tell them, I would say, don't own the drama that other people give you.
Amen.
Don't own it and don't take it on. Know who you are. Stand in your truth. And when they throw stuff at you, just know that you are protected, because you got to let the Lord fight your battles. And you got to know when to shake the dust off your feet and move on to another place. And sometimes that's what you got to do. Sometimes you got to leave that job. You got to leave that church. You got to leave that relationship. You got to shake the dust off your feet. As the scripture says, stay there as long as they're receiving you, and sup with them. But when they're no longer receiving you, shake the dust off your feet and move on. And that's my thing. I've learned how to shake the dust off my feet and see you and go on to the next place. Even when I question God, sometimes I say, Lord, why is this happening to me? And God said, it's time for you to shake you've done all you can do there. And when God tells you you've done all you can do there, and it's time for you to move on, you got to take that and receive it. And every time God has said that, I've been blessed by going to a new place. Did I answer y'all's questions?
I have actually 2 questions, and you take them whichever way you want to take them. Are you healed, as you like to ask us? And are there any questions that we didn't ask?
Yeah, I would say that I'm healed. Yeah, I mean, I have, I've grown from it. I've learned from it. And I think that I share my story because I want people to understand and know that they can handle what's coming at them and that they can overcome. Yeah, I think I'm healed from it, but it's those things I've never forgotten, those things that have been, that made me who I am. Those thorns, as God gives you a thorn in your side to remind you of who God is. Those thorns I haven't forgotten, because those thorns help to make me who I am. So I think that that's what's helped me to heal, is that I've never forgotten the thorns.
You do know you just preached, right?
No.
No, I mean, there were points I wanted to say really loudly, amen, like I was in church. So yeah, it's like, okay, she's preaching. So,
But yeah, I haven't forgotten the thorns, but I'm not still hurt by those things. I've moved on. Some would say I'm bitter on a few things, and I'm sure I still have a little bitterness about a few things. But that's just, my human nature. Bitter is not healed. There's a difference.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Thank you for sharing, because you've certainly touched on quite a bit in your story, because I know that a lot of times we do experience those hurts from the church as well as employment, and it's hard to deal with both of those dynamics sometimes. But I feel like you shared some really good things and some good strategies as to how to deal with those hurts, and move on to be, in a good place, with, physically moving your location or your fellowships, whether or not that's work or church, and you can take that into other areas in your lives too, as well as being around and engaging with people who support you, who show you that unconditional love, and that can be there as mentors and guides. So I really appreciate you sharing that.